Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Clayton Campbell, and it's a privilege to welcome you back to this third Business Kickstart session with Jamal Sahib. We're going to be starting at 3:02. So please do grab a pen and a paper if you do need to take some notes. We're also encouraging you to ask questions during the session using the questions option that's in your control panel. And those questions will be fielded towards the end of the session. On a lighter note, happy Freedom Day. We hope everybody's staying warm today. So we'll just give it another 2 minutes and then we'll get going. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great privilege and pleasure to introduce to you Jamal Sahib, entrepreneur, author, business coach. Jamal, thank you very much for hosting this session on a public holiday. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Clayton. Thank you for hosting us this afternoon again. To everybody that's dialed in this afternoon, welcome. I hope that I add value to all of you and that together we can get the South African economy going again. Post-lockdown, it's going to be a phased approach. So we need to plan accordingly and we need to help to get this economy going as safely as possible. For those of you that have worked with me before or have joined into a webinar with me before, you would know that I am a metallurgical process engineer. I worked in mining for a multinational for just under 10 years. I worked for BHP Billiton and Anglo American Platinum and was eventually one of the mine managers for BHP Billiton. I then, post an MBA, became an entrepreneur, started my own businesses, and also became a business coach and started to coach other business owners so that they could grow their businesses and continue to create employment in South Africa right now. So, as you would know, one of my greatest passions is both business and job creation in South Africa, which is an absolutely stunning country, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. For me, job creation is important because through job creation, we are able to reduce the Gini coefficient, reduce crime in this country. So for us as business owners, we need to remember that it is up to us to determine what South Africa will look like in the future. In one of my seminars earlier this week, I explained to everybody why I do a brief COVID update when I start a seminar. So many years ago when I worked for BHP Billiton, BHP Billiton was passionate about safety at the time. And there was a year in which Marius Kloppers was the CEO of the organization, and we were part of his leadership team in the organization. And that year, BHP Billiton did not have a single fatality all over the world. And that's more than 100,000 employees and contractors that worked for the organization. And we found that being passionate about safety at the time, at the start of every single meeting around the world, if you worked for BHP Billiton and you were having a meeting that had some sort of relevance to the organization, the meeting started with what they called a safety share at the time. So it was a brief discussion, 2 to 5 minutes around safety and making people consciously aware all the time of the importance of safety within the organization. And for that reason, for every meeting that I have, we start with a basic COVID update, because it is critically important for us to know what is happening in the world of COVID right now, so that we can ultimately overcome this and continue to live our lives normally post-COVID. So a quick update in probably 60 seconds. We know by now that in the world that there are more than 3 million confirmed positive tests for COVID. So this doesn't mean that there's 3 million people that have COVID. It means that we've tested and found more than 3 million have positively tested, which means there could be way more than 3 million. In fact, there are way more than 3 million people right now with the coronavirus globally. Globally, there have been more than 207,000 people that have passed away from the virus. But the good news is that more than 880,000 people have recovered from the virus. Now, if we look at a country like USA has more than 980,000 confirmed coronavirus cases, and more than 55,000 people have passed away with the virus. In comparison, South Africa has more than 4,500 positive tests for COVID-19, and we have lost 87 people to this virus since it arrived in South Africa. Now, the good news is out of the 4,546, we have had 1,400 odd cases of people that have recovered from the virus. So yes, right now, it's a tough situation being in lockdown for many of our organizations and many of our businesses. But the reality is right now, from the evidence that's available globally, if we do not impose some sort of a lockdown and restrict the movement of people, the spread of the virus will be uncontrolled in South Africa, and our health system will not be able to cope with the rate at which the virus will spread. So I ask for everybody to consider this as they start to open up their businesses and start to trade post the lockdown on the 1st of May. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of a recap. So I'll spend the first 10 or 15 minutes doing a recap on what we've covered in previous webinars the last few weeks. And then there's new content that I'd like to go through in terms of how can we now start to think differently and how can we grow businesses. So starting up, through the webinars that we've covered, the first webinar we discussed how we moved people out of the fear zone. So in the fear zone, people were spreading negative information. People were afraid. They were not screening stuff that came through. They were staying in, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, on groups, following certain people that were negative. And everybody was stuck in this, what we call the fear zone. And within the first webinar, quite quickly, we consciously pulled people out of this fear zone, and we said, please unfriend people that are negative. Please leave the groups that are spreading negative information. Ask yourself, are you one of those people that's contributing to this negativity in the country and in the world right now? You need to stop that behavior. So consciously, we were able to pull many people out of this fear zone into what we called the learning zone. And in the learning zone, people were a little bit more stable. They started to understand their emotions. They stopped compulsively consuming things that was hurting them. They started to evaluate the information around them before they took a decision and before they spread information. The third step is which we want to pull ourselves into right now, and that's the learning or the growth zone. Sorry, the growth zone. In the growth zone, it's the space where we start to be more empathetic and start to understand what are the implications for people around us if we behave badly right now. So if we take the wrong business decisions right now, what is the impact of that on the people in our organizations? What is the impact of the incorrect decisions on the communities in which we find ourselves? So we start to operate in the growth zone where we learn more. We start reading books. Just before everybody dialed in, I said to Clayton, how's your day so far? He says, no, it's been tough. I said, why? He says, no, I've been doing my homework. I've read 2 chapters of the book that, we're covering. So him and I, we are currently discussing a book. And because we are growing, we are learning, we are in the growth zone where we're looking at things differently. And that's important right now. And for the people that have dialed into the webinars, you find yourself in this growth zone now. And thank you for being a part of this. We also then spoke about the 2 types of people that exist in the world. There are those people that live their lives above the line, and they are successful people. Those people, you will find the characteristics that they share is that they take ownership, accountability, and responsibility. They energize people and teams around them. Those are powerful, successful people. Then you have the types of people that live their lives below the line. Those people blame everybody and everything else for something that goes wrong. They have excuses for everything that they didn't deliver on or didn't do. And quite often they live in denial. And living in denial is where you tell yourself a lie for such a long time that you start to believe it. Now, those people are generally unsuccessful people, and they are powerless. They drain people in teams. They are also often regarded as energy vampires or bucket dippers. So right now, as business owners and business leaders in this country, we need to take ownership, accountability, and responsibility for everything that happens around us. Regardless of the cards we are dealt, we need to play the game with the cards that we have, and we need to play the best possible game with the cards that we have. So as business leaders, we need to make sure that every decision that we take right now, in some way or form, will help our businesses to grow. It will help the South African economy. It will help the people that work for us, and it will help our communities around us. The next thing we then spoke about was some people are known as know-it-alls. And in order to continuously grow and be better in life, we need to be learn-it-alls. So even the know-it-alls didn't see COVID-19 coming. So many of them are caught off guard. Now, the way I live my life is that I continuously learn and I want to learn. And I find that many of the people that I spend my time with are also people that understand that it doesn't matter if you're 20 years old, if you're 50 years old, or if you're 70 years old. There's always something new that you can learn from other people and from the world around you. So let's stay in this learning space and let's continue to be learn-it-alls. We then spoke about and conversations, where we said we need to work and have family and have fun. So it's not a work-life balance conversation, because work is a component of life, just like family is a component of life, and community is a component of life, and fun is a component of life. So we need to be having these and conversations. Now, right now, going forward, many people will be afraid to go back to work. The reality is we need to find a way to stay safe and stay healthy and get our businesses going, because we cannot neglect our businesses for months and years to come. I mean, the reality is if we neglect our businesses and our businesses crash, the economy crashes, then people will starve to death. So we need to find a way to have these and conversations where we stay safe, we stay healthy, and we get our businesses and the economy going. Then we spoke of light bulb moments, and I described how adults learn. Adults learn through a process where, through discussion, people go, "Oh, why didn't I think of that? Oh, that's a great example." And through that process, adults learn and they stretch their thinking capacity. So today, as we go through this webinar and as you learn new things, please write them down. Because when you have a light bulb moment and you write it down, you remember it for longer. And as you write it down, you make a mental note to action on that light bulb moment. And there will be many light bulb moments today as well. And then finally, in the last session, we also spoke of two other things. The one was the 7 habits of highly effective people. And we used that as a means and a method of how to stay motivated during a tough time. And we spoke of things like being proactive and win-win. And there were 7 habits that Stephen Covey spoke about that, regardless of how good or how bad or how difficult or how easy times are, effective people that are successful always follow those 7 habits, and we went through them in detail. And then finally, we spoke about the importance of innovation at the time, and how, as the world continues to change, we need to continuously innovate within our businesses, or else the world will leave our businesses and us behind. Okay. So today, I like simplifying things, and with business leaders on the other end of this webinar, I'd like to simplify something called an income statement. Now, when I coach businesses from small to large independent businesses. So my smallest client has an annual turnover of in the region of 2 million rand per annum, and my largest client has an annual revenue in excess of 500 million per annum, and all are independent businesses. So the starting point is I often enjoy unpacking a simple thing called an income statement, and I'd like to unpack an income statement today, because this becomes the basis of conversation for the rest of this webinar that happens on the back end. So in an income statement, an income statement is a company, it shows a company's revenue or sales line over a period of time. So you can have an income statement for the month, and you can see what was your sales or revenue line for the month of February, for example, February 2020. It also shows the matching cost of sales for that period of time. So your income statement for February 2020 will show you the revenue line for the month, but it will also show you the cost of sale associated with that revenue for the month of February. Similarly, you can have an income statement for a quarter, so January, February, March, or you can have an income statement for the year. So what did my business perform like in the year 2019, for example? So the third important part on an income statement is the expense lines. So you have a revenue line. Linked to your revenue line, you often have a cost of sale line. Then you have your expense lines on your income statement. And then finally, you have your profit or loss line. So your revenue less your cost of sales, less your expenses will give you a profit or loss. Now, important to note is that your income statement will show you your profit or loss on paper. This is money on paper and not necessarily in the bank. On your balance sheet, which is a separate conversation that we'll have at some point in a webinar, you will be able to see whether the money lies in debtors, whether the money lies in the bank, whether the money lies in cash, etc., etc. Now, in an income statement, quite often we show a huge profit line, but often the money is taken out of our business because our debtors haven't paid us in time. The reality is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is reality. And I have a saying that goes, you can run a business at a loss for a very long time, so long as you have cash flow. However, conversely, you can run a profitable business into the ground if your cash flow is not right. So equations for bottom line profit or profitability in a business is basically your top line or your revenue minus your cost of sale gives you your gross profit. Your gross profit minus your total expenses gives you your profit or loss. So that's a simplified income statement. So here we're just talking profit or loss on an income statement. The conversation around cash and where the money really lies is a conversation that we'll have separately as we go through a discussion someday in the near future in a webinar on a balance sheet. Now, I like doing this because you get an engineer's interpretation of an income statement and not an accountant's interpretation of an income statement. So this way, I've gone through the effort to simplify this so that non-financial managers within organizations that quite often run businesses and business units quite easily grasp the concept of an income statement and a balance sheet, because I deliver it in the simplest possible version. So what I've done here is I've put up, or I've just dotted, two income statements. The one on the left, you'll see it says SMME, approximately 20 million per annum. The one on the right says large independent, approximately 500 million rand per annum turnover. So what I've done is I've taken 2 months and I've built income statements for these companies for 2 months, and then I've used that to extrapolate an income statement for the company for a given year. So let's take the SME on the left-hand side, the company that does approximately 20 million rand per annum in revenue. Now in March of 2019, and I'll move my cursor here, in March of 2019, you will find on the income statement of this SME that they did a turnover or revenue of 1.5 million rand. Now, for this company, I've assumed that this company operates in a retail space and has an average cost of sale, which worked out to 77%. So basically a gross profit of 23%. Now, quite often people make a huge error when they're calculating their gross profits because they assume that markup and margin is the same thing. So for clarity, let's clarify this. The gross profit in this company, I've used the number of 23%. That means on the 1.5 million rand revenue line, the cost of sale of the items that were sold were 1,155,000, meaning that money would need to be paid back to suppliers for the product that was bought to be resold. So on the 1,500,000 rand, the gross profit would then be 345,000 rand. That's the 23% gross profit in that retail business for the month. Other income quite often in businesses are things like profit on investment. In this case, I've used a 1% settlement discount as other income. So that you can see where other income comes in on an income statement. So you have your gross profit line, then you have your 1% settlement discount on your total purchases or cost of sales for the month. And the total income then becomes 356,000 Rand for the month of March for this SME. Assuming your big expenses are rent, let's say it's 60,000 Rand a month, staff salaries, so for permanent employees, you look at 120,000 Rand a month, and staff wages, these are for non-permanent employees, 10,000 Rand a month. And then I grouped all the other expenses together and I just used a round number of 50,000 for things like vehicles, insurance, electricity, internet, telephone, consumable spend, stationery, printing, etc. And the total expenses then became 240,000 Rand for the month. This company would then show a net profit of 116,000 Rand for that month. So it's net sales minus cost of sales gives you gross profit, plus other income gives you total income of 356,000, minus your total expenses of 240,000 would then give you a profit of 116,000 for the month of March. Now for the same company, if they had done a turnover of 2 million the next month, in the month of April, the cost of sales still remained the same. I assumed an overall 23% gross profit. So the gross profit in that business would be 460,000. The other income, which would be settlement discounts from suppliers, would go up to 15,400. And the total income for that business would be 475,000 Rand. Now I assume that if the turnover went up, perhaps they'd need a little bit more staff. So the salaries went up from 120 to 130. I assumed that they rented an extra space for storage, so the rent went up slightly. I assumed it was a bit of a variable cost. Quite often it's not, it's a fixed cost anyway. I've taken the wages up slightly and I've taken all the other expenses up slightly as well. So you'll find that the total expenses went to 272,000, and that company then for the month of April made a 203,000 Rand net profit, which is huge. So you can see the impact on a turnover increase. If your sales go up, it has a significant impact on your bottom line. I used those numbers and I averaged it out. So I added the 2 divided by 2 and I multiplied by 12 to get the average revenue for a year for that company. So the average revenue for a company like that would be in the region of 21 million with a net profit just under 10%, which is about 2 million per annum. So this, by a rule of thumb, in quite a few companies that I work with, this is the space that they tend to operate in. So you'll find that the staff salaries and wages currently is at about 8 to 10% of the revenue, and another significant component of the expense line is rent. So I'm building up to a point, and I will show you the detail that I'd like to get into as to how you can use these tools to overcome some of the challenges that we are going to experience post-COVID. So the average company that does between 1.5 and 2 million Rand per month, does approximately 20 million Rand per year, has a net profit of about 2 million Rand per annum. So it sits in the region of about 10%. Salaries and wages are quite high. They sit at about 8%, and then your rent is another significant component. Let's look at a large independent. Now, for a large independent, I've used random numbers of 40 million per annum for the month of March, and then I said 45 million for the month of April. Now, for the large independent, I've assumed that it's a wholesaling company. So they are a wholesaler of a product. And on wholesale, your gross profits are generally lower. So in this space, I've applied an 18% gross profit, which is a 22 or 23% markup on the product. So assuming an 18% gross profit on 40 million Rand turnover for the month, you'd look at a gross profit of 7.2 million. Other income would be in the form of profit on investment, or in this case, 1% settlement discount on purchases. A total income of 7.5 million. I assumed 500,000 Rand for rent, 3.5 million for salaries for the month, wages 100,000 Rand, and then all other expenses like vehicle insurance, electricity, etc. for 250,000 Rand. And that company would then do a profit of 3.1 million for the month of March. If they had an increase in turnover to 45 million in the month of April, they would have a bottom line profit of 3.5 million in the month of April. And if you extrapolated that in a 12-month period, you'd find that they do in the region of 500 million Rand revenue for the year, with a net profit of in the region of about 40 million. Now, what I'd like to take out of this income statement that I've simplified, and we simplify these for businesses of all sizes. A critical line for any business is the net sales line. So if there's something we need to focus on, is we need to focus on growing that top line of the organization at any given time. We also need to find ways to reduce our cost of sales. That then helps us to stretch our gross profit. We need to pay on time where possible and negotiate good settlement discounts with suppliers, and that increases our other income into the business. We need to always be cognizant of the big expenses like rent and staff salaries and wages. And through that process, optimize our expenses together with all the other expenses like tea and coffee. And eventually, we end up with a profit line, which is what we are chasing at any given time in an organization, is we need to grow the profit line. So how do we do this? We do this by selling better. We do this by selling more. And we do this by selling at better prices. So this is the crux of today's discussion. We're going to go into more detail on these items. We also need to buy better, because if we buy better, we stretch our margin. We need to price better, which, well, that links back to sell at better prices. Because if we price better and we understand the value of our product better, we increase our margin on the product. We need to look at reducing expenses like rent and optimizing these spaces, especially now during COVID-19. And then we need to optimize our salaries and wages expense, because the reality is right now, if we don't optimize in these spaces, and yes, I'm passionate about job creation and employment, but if we don't optimize in these spaces right now, the end result is that our organizations will shut down and everybody will be unemployed. So as business leaders right now, we need to have those tough conversations around productivity, efficiency, and getting more value for the salaries and the wages that we are paying, so that we can allow for our companies to survive post-COVID. So how do we increase profitability in a business? We need to increase revenue by selling better. We need to decrease our expenses, but specifically looking at the 80-20 principle. We need to decrease our cost of sales by buying more smartly. And we need to use what I call out-of-the-box marketing principles. So marketing really is math. In fact, marketing is also science. And it's easy. So quite often people don't enjoy math and science. I'm saying marketing is math, marketing is science, and marketing is easy. because we have and conversations. So I'm going to take you through a little graph that I've built. And through this process, we are going to find ways to grow our businesses right now in the middle of this COVID impact. So I've done some calculations and I've put them into a table in this slide. So firstly, I'd like to start with the definition of a prospect. A prospect is anybody that could potentially buy your product or service in your business. Now, if we look at our businesses, the key things that we look at is we look at the revenue line. We want to do a higher revenue and we want to make more profit. So those are the two key things that we generally look at. Now you'll find on the slide that the revenue line is blue and the profit line is also in blue. And the reason for that is those are outcomes of things that happened previously in the business. So we're going to focus on the things that lead up to increasing revenue and increasing profit in an organization. And the starting point for that is actually a prospect. So the definition of a prospect is anybody that could potentially buy your product or service. Anybody that could potentially buy your product or service is a prospect. Now, quite often, we have prospects out there, but prospects don't know that they can buy a product or service from us that they need. So work then needs to be done by us as organizations through the form of marketing to convert those people from prospects to leads. So let's now do the definition of a lead. A lead is somebody that could potentially buy a product or service from us, and they are aware of us and they have interacted with us in some way or form. So I'll say that again. A lead is somebody that could potentially buy a product or service from us, and they have interacted with us in some way or form. So let's use an example. Perhaps the business that we are talking about is a hardware store. The lead is somebody that could potentially wants to build a house and needs to buy some cement. So originally, the person was a prospect. They were building a house and they needed to buy cement. Work needed to be done by the business, by the hardware store, to catch the attention of this prospect to say, hey, mister, you are building a house, you need cement, we could potentially supply you with that cement. The moment we caught the attention of this prospect and he interacted with us by phoning us or walking into our hardware store or sending us an email or sending us a message on Facebook Messenger, the moment he interacted with us in some way or form, he became a lead, which means that he now knew he could buy a product or service from us and he was interested in potentially buying it from us. Work then needs to be done by us to get this person to conclude the transaction. The work that then happens is also a form of marketing. And the moment that transaction is completed, the lead becomes a customer. So let's put some numbers into the equation. Let's use a residential area where potentially there are 20,000 residents that could buy a product from a hardware store. So those 20,000 residents in that area are prospects to the hardware store. Work needs to be done by the hardware store to catch the attention of those prospects so that they could potentially sell something to those prospects. Now, the work that gets done then impacts what we call a conversion rate. So if the 20,000 people in that neighborhood or in that suburb, from the 20,000 people, if 25% of those people were then interested in purchasing a product or item from this hardware store, 20,000 times a 25% conversion rate means that 5,000 people then knew about the store. But how does that happen? So there are specific marketing initiatives that we go through and we look at that are relevant to industry and to budget. That as a coach, I work with business owners to get them to unpack these things so that together we understand these better and we optimize the way we capture and convert prospects to leads. So a simple example, back to a hardware store, is a massive billboard at the entrance of the suburb saying #1 hardware store in the suburb, with the name of the hardware store and perhaps the telephone number. So that potentially is a marketing mechanism that could be used to increase the conversion rate so that more people know that that hardware store exists and it's the #1 hardware store in the area. So prospects multiplied by 25. For this case, let's assume a 25% conversion rate. So from the 20,000 people that live in this area, 25% of them know about this hardware store, and therefore 5,000 people are now leads. From the 5,000 people that interact with this business, not all of them will buy the product. So we find sometimes you might be on a website, you look at the website and perhaps you look at buying a treadmill, you look at it and you might not buy. So you were a lead, but there was no conversion to customer. But sometimes you are on a website and work was done by the business owner, and through the work done by the business owner in some sort and type of marketing, they got you to buy the treadmill. The moment you bought, you converted and became a customer. So for example, on the website, there'd be a pop-up that said, buy now and we will deliver tomorrow. And because you needed a treadmill, it's in the middle of COVID, you're in lockdown, you wanted the treadmill tomorrow, it was a marketing technique used by the business owner to get you to do a transaction immediately. So let's assume right now that this hardware store has a 25% conversion rate from lead to customer. So from the 5,000 people that interact with them in a period of time, say for example a month, this hardware store manages to get 1,250 of those people to buy from them. And let's say that each transaction that a customer concludes is a transaction with a value of 100 Rand. And each of those customers buys from that hardware store twice in a month. So if we take 1,250 Rand, we multiply it by 100 Rand per transaction, and we multiply it by 2 because each customer buys from this hardware store twice in a month, you have a revenue of 250,000 Rand. Now, if you take that revenue and you multiply it at a net profit margin example for that business of 10%, you would end up with a profit of 25,000 Rand. Now, as business owners in the middle of COVID, let's assume you ran this small business. This was your business. You had 20,000 prospects. You had a conversion rate of 25% historically. That means you had 5,000 leads on any given month. You converted 25,000 of those. You had 1,250 customers. Through them, you did 250,000 Rand in revenue, and you made a 25,000 Rand profit. On the right-hand side, I have a column showing potential COVID impact. Now, with the potential COVID impact, I've shown that your number of prospects, people that are potentially looking to buy your product, has dropped because many people are worried about whether they will have jobs in the next month or 3 months' time. So the pool of people that are willing to spend money on many products that you currently sell has dropped. Now, if the pool of prospects is dropping, let's assume that there's a 20% drop and the prospects dropped to 16,000. And your conversion rate also dropped from 25% to 20%, which means 16,000 prospects times a 20% conversion to lead means you would have 3,200 leads. And if your conversion from lead to customer also dropped from 25% to 20%, because people are thinking not twice, but they're thinking 3 times before they conclude a transaction right now. Unless you're selling hand sanitizer, then it's a bit different, I guess. But that's not going to last long either. So let's say the conversion rate dropped. You now have 640 customers instead of previously where you had 1,250 customers. And now people are trying to buy more consciously. And if they previously bought for 100 Rand, a basket worth 100 Rand from you, they're trying to save wherever they can. So they may now spend 90 Rand in a transaction with you. And whereas they would previously have bought from you twice in a month, they might buy from you once in a month. So if you take 640 customers multiplied by 90 Rand, multiplied by one transaction per month, it means that your revenue will drop to 57,600 Rand. And quite honestly, there is no net profit margin that's relevant to this scenario, because your fixed costs like rent and staff, if they are unchanged, it means you will probably drop to a loss of 95,000 Rand because of the COVID impact. So from 3 months ago, a 250,000 Rand revenue in that suburb with a 25,000 Rand profit, to now a 57,000 Rand revenue with a 95,000 Rand loss. So we need to start to think more cleverly right now. We need to start to think, as our businesses, what are those expenses that we can cut out right now? So I've spoken about this before, and I've said, if we are tenants, we need to start engaging with our landlords to get them to understand that we need to find a shared space where we share the impact of this pandemic. So we need to reduce the rentals on our businesses so that they can survive into the future. So I described the impact as follows. There are three parties involved in any business. The one is the business owner or the business itself, which gets their revenue in through transaction. They either sell a product or they sell a service and they generate a revenue. The second component is usually a landlord. And a landlord, their revenue is in the form of rental income. And the third type of person that's involved in the setup is an employee. And an employee gets their income through a salary or wage. Now, the reality is that COVID-19 will impact all three of these revenue streams. So if a business cannot trade because they are impacted by COVID-19, then it means their revenue has dropped off significantly. Similarly, a landlord needs to understand that COVID will impact their business as a landlord, and the landlord's business is receiving rental. So as a business that's trading is impacted and their revenue has dropped from trading, a business owner that's in the business of getting rental in as their form of revenue will also be impacted, and the revenue will drop in that space. And thirdly, employees will be impacted as well, because if their salaries are not adjusted accordingly right now, the reality is that that organization will not exist in the future if COVID lasts 3 months, 4 months, 5 months from now. So in certain industries like tourism and with gyms, they're talking about opening up those industries at level 2, which currently is anticipated to be around August. If those organizations don't share this burden 3 ways, most companies within those industries will not survive. Okay, so that's on the expense side. But now I want us to start to think a little bit differently and look at this column here in the middle. So as previously, as an organization, if you had 20,000 prospects, what can you do right now to increase your number of prospects that could potentially buy from your business? This is how we need to start to think as business leaders. So as a hardware store, I used an example previously, a hardware store in a suburb that had 20,000 people in that suburb that could potentially have bought a product from them, those would have been the prospects. But let's flip this and let's use a different example. So let's use my coaching business as the next example. In my coaching business, my prospects previously may have just been people that lived in Gauteng or in the Centurion Pretoria area or within a 50-kilometer radius from my office in Centurion. So my prospects would be business owners in that part of the country. I've had to stop and think more cleverly around how can I adapt my business so that I can increase my pool of prospects. And therefore, I have flipped my business around the last few weeks. And because the environment has forced people to move online and move digital, that combination has allowed me to increase my pool of prospects, from 20,000 business owners in a 50-kilometer radius from me to 200,000 businesses all over South Africa right now. So my prospect pool has changed, and my marketing strategy will change over the next few weeks, because I no longer will only coach one-to-one with business owners that are in a 50-kilometer radius of my office. I can now do one-to-one business owner coaching or business leader coaching with businesses that can be found anywhere in South Africa, because businesses have been forced to move to Zoom and Skype and Microsoft Teams, and people are becoming more comfortable with that. So right now, I found a way to increase the prospects that could potentially buy a service from my business. Now, for business leaders on the phone, I want you to sit with your teams and think of how can you potentially change the current prospect market of your product or service. What are those things that you can do right now to flip that around? Another example typically would be if you were in the business, let's say you were in a high LSM area, you were in Waterfall Estate, and you owned the gym in Waterfall Estate, and you know that for the next 3 or 4 months, your gym will not operate. Is there a way that you could potentially rent out your gym equipment? So, rent out your treadmills. So a treadmill in a Virgin Active costs in excess of 100,000 Rand for a treadmill. So for people to go out right now knowing that they're not going to be able to go to the gym for the next 4 or 5 months, perhaps there are people out there that would be willing to rent a treadmill for 1,500 or 2,000 Rand a month. So the prospect pool previously was people that wanted to come to gym, but if you flip that business model around right now and for the next few months rent out your equipment, and yes, you'd need to take precaution with things like insuring the equipment against breakdown and theft, etc. That's a separate conversation. But what are those mechanisms and strategies that you can use to increase your prospect pool right now in your business, in your organization? Sometimes you can modify your product. So previously, maybe you were in the industry of manufacturing something out of steel. And a lot of construction has been standing right now. What are the things that are in demand right now that you can make out of steel that you can flip your business around and rather supply those into the market right now? So a simple example that I've heard the other day was a company that did mezzanine floors, and they did a lot of structural steel work, and they pivoted and they flipped their business around, and they started to manufacture things like dumbbells and barbells and started to sell dumbbells and barbells. So they've changed their prospect market completely. So as business owners right now, every business leader that sits on this webinar with me today needs to plan a session where you strategize with your team. And if you need some backing from me, I have some strategies that we can use to help you unpack how you can readjust your business and re-strategize so that you can survive and stay alive in your business right now. So what are some of those things that you can do to change your business around, to change your prospect market around right now? The next thing business owners need to seriously look at quite closely is what can they do to increase their conversion rates? We can no longer afford for somebody to walk into our businesses and not buy something. So previously somebody would walk into your business, and because they received bad service, maybe the person that served them on, perhaps you're in the furniture industry. I know some of you guys that are on the line are from the furniture industry. Perhaps a customer walked in with the intention of buying a fridge, but the salesperson that served them was either unfriendly or didn't have sufficient product knowledge. And the person looked around and decided, no, I'm not going to buy this fridge, and left. And they went and bought this fridge elsewhere. That conversion rate should not be acceptable anymore. We should be working to increase our conversion rates as close to 100% as possible. That being said, a strategy for increasing conversion rate in that industry would be to make sure that we have the right people in our stores right now. We have the friendly people. We have the people that understand the product right now. We have the people that know how to upsell and cross-sell. We cannot afford to lose a sale right now. Similarly, if you are working in heavy industry and perhaps your clients are the mining industry and you're supplying a product into the mining industry, perhaps you're supplying electric motors. Maybe you supply electric motors. Right now, if you have a mining company sending you an email requesting a quotation, you cannot afford to reply to them after 2 or 3 days. You cannot afford right now to replying to that email in a rude manner. We need to have our most effective, efficient people right now responding to requests for quotations. Those are some of the things that we need to look at to increase our conversion rate from lead to customer. We need to do everything possible to get people to buy right now. And I will share this presentation with everybody. I'll send out an email later in the week. In fact, probably by Wednesday, we'll pop out an email with this PowerPoint presentation as a PDF, together with the recording of this webinar. I'd like for you to use this where possible. Sit down with your teams, unpack this, understand what is our core business right now, what is our strategy, who are our current prospects. Now that the world has changed, who could potentially be our new prospects? How can we flip our business around to deliver a different product or different service with what we have so that our prospect or target market will change and we can still sell a product or, during this time. We need to look at, if we're coming back online in the next few days and we're coming back with 1/3 of our workforce, who will that 1/3 workforce be? It needs to be our most effective, efficient people. It needs to be our people that are loyal. It needs to be our people that understand the product. It needs to be the people that have good relationship with the customers that will probably come back online first. We need to be consciously thinking of how can we increase our conversion rate from lead to customer right now, and unpack this in detail. And if you're looking for more guidance, input, support, you're more than welcome to pop me an email, drop me a call, and we can work through stuff like this. But right now, we need to use our basic knowledge of income statements, our basic knowledge of marketing, and go back to first principles. Fundamental, foundational first principles are the things that we built our businesses on. Those are the principles that we will use to keep our businesses alive right now. And those foundational principles will be the principles that we rebuild our businesses on. So that being said, I'm going to wrap up and open the floor for a few questions. Hopefully you guys have typed a few questions in, and Clayton will then read those questions through to me, and I'll field a few questions. And for the ones that we can't get to, you are more than welcome to pop me an email and we'll try and respond to those questions as quickly as possible. But as I wrap up, I've pivoted my business, I've flipped my business around, and I'm now offering one-to-one coaching services for business owners and business leaders all over South Africa. So my one-to-one coaching service is not only for 50-kilometer radius from Centurion, but it's a national service right now, and anybody can sign up for me to do one-to-one coaching once a week with a business owner. Quite often, business owners just need somebody to speak to, somebody to ask them the right questions, to help them to unpack a current scenario. And if you're looking for somebody that's going to help you to do that, then I'm able to do that now through Zoom, through Skype, or through Google Teams. Also, by coaching different business owners, quite often, it saves businesses from having to reinvent the wheel. So often I find well, not just me alone, but perhaps myself and a business owner in one industry, perhaps in the manufacturing industry, would find a solution to something. And a week later, I'd be having a conversation with a business leader or business owner in the retail space. And we use a similar solution and we modify it for the retail space. And it saves us from reinventing the wheel. And through that process, we save 2 businesses and many, many jobs around it. The second service that I'll be offering nationally is one-to-one leadership team coaching. So now not only do I coach a business owner, but I'm happy to coach the leadership team under the business owner to help that business survive right now. Because the reality is that every organization will have fewer people post-COVID than they had before they went into COVID. Most organizations will be in that space. And in order for those businesses to survive, they will need for those people to be more effective, more efficient, and more productive. And the only way to do that is through growing those people. So if as a business owner you'd like for one-to-one coaching for your team members around you, I'm more than happy to do that as well. Perhaps coach it with a business owner on a Monday and then coach with his team members on a Tuesday. and through that process, clearly articulate the vision and the way forward for the organization. The third thing that I'm doing right now with a few of my clients across the country is I'm facilitating or I'm co-chairing a weekly meeting for them where I co-chair the weekly ops meeting. It's a 2-hour meeting for the business owner and his first line management. And I chair that meeting and keep them to the basic fundamentals and principles of that meeting. And because it's a structured meeting that we all dial into, those weekly meetings continue to happen. And they not only form an ops meeting, but they've flipped and become both ops and strategy meetings for that organization for each week. And finally, I'm running an expert negotiator workshop in May, and we'll send the details out of that in the next meeting, in the next email as well. So I'd like to thank everybody for dialing into this webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure working with all of you the last few weeks. I trust I've been able to keep you guys motivated, you know, in the midst of a tough situation. I hope that the teachings that I've passed along are used for the betterment of your companies and for the betterment of the South African economy in general. We really, as business leaders in this country, need to club together. We need to work together. We need to be more efficient. We need to be more effective. We need to learn. We need to grow so that our businesses may survive right now. We need to keep the unemployment unchanged, and then we need to reduce the unemployment into the future. That responsibility is on our shoulders as business owners and business leaders. So I thank you for joining me, and I'll now open the floor up to questions.
Thank you, Jamal. Some very valuable tips there for business owners to start to really look and deep down into what they need to do to move forward. I don't see any questions that have come through. So I think with that, we'll let the people go. Enjoy the rest of your Freedom Day, last day of public holiday before we get back into work tomorrow. Jamal, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Stay home.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for dialing in. As I said, if you have any questions, please pop them through. We have your email addresses, so we'll send out the link to this recorded webinar, as well as the PDF of this presentation. And we hope that you use this for the success of your company. Have an awesome Freedom Day. Take care, and thanks for dialing in.